is joining and who is now in our meeting. Thank you for giving your time to attend tonight. Your microphone and video have been turned off since we are going to record this. However, as we get into some of the conversation pieces, it'll be up to you if you want to have your camera on or off. We can stop recording for the discussion portion later on. We want to make sure that everyone is feeling safe and supported here this evening, so we'll make sure that we put the crisis line in the chat, as well as Rock's access line if you have any questions about any of Rock's services. And while we're speaking, we'll still be able to interact with everyone through the chat feature tonight. So if you have a question or if you want to share a thought, you can put it in the chat below, and we'll have a chat moderator who is receiving your questions and can ask them throughout the presentation. And just so that you're feeling comfortable, you can engage as much or as little as you want. We're just happy that you're here tonight. Kasia, you'll see her square there. Kasia will be our chat moderator. Hi, Kasia.
Hi, I just copied and pasted the crisis number, and additional word has kind of pasted in everyone. So please disregard that. That doesn't make any sense, but everything else does.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Kasia she'll receive any questions. You'll also be given lots of opportunities tonight at the beginning of the presentation to ask, and say what you're here for, what you're hoping to get out of it. But if at any point you want to ask something else, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to it. We'll hopefully have a good, fulsome conversation at the end of the presentation, I think around 8 o'clock. So we'll make sure that everyone has a chance to have a chat then. And before we get into things, let's start with the land acknowledgement from Kasia.
Thank you, Selena. Welcome, everybody. We are honored to welcome you to this event. Please take a moment right now to allow yourself to fully arrive. Allow the dust to settle in your mind. Bring your attention to your body, your breath, this present moment. Inhale a deep breath and exhale slowly. You are here. Welcome. I would like to mention that our programs run in the region of Halton, and we would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on an Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe people. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions that Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and a country as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasia, and welcome everyone. Thank you for registering for tonight's workshop. We can start with some introductions. So my name is Selena, and I'm a care coordinator with Caroline Families First. So is Kasia, who is our co-host tonight. Caroline Families First, for anyone who does not know, is a partnership program working with local family health teams, pediatricians, and community mental health providers such as Rock. We use a wraparound model of care to help clients and their families reach their goals towards mental health and well-being. Also with us tonight, we have Maria Rosa, who you probably recognize from last week, and she is the lead volunteer for workshops and event coordinator for Halton Families for Families. We are running this two-part series along with Halton Families for Families, which is a community collaborative that's here to support you and your family. So they are made up of volunteer parents and caregivers who partner with community organizations to organize events, workshops, and social events where you can connect with other families and feel supported and comfortable as a family. We'll put their website in the chat so everyone will have an opportunity to check out their website later on. And now we will introduce our speaker tonight, who is working for part 2, Achieving Healthy Sleep and Stress Management, and it will be led by Dr. Michael Coons. Dr. Coons is a clinical health and rehabilitation psychologist. He works with youth, adults, and families in his private practice in Burlington, the Health Collaborative. Dr. Coons is a diplomat in behavioral sleep medicine with the Social of Behavioral Sleep Medicine. He is also a father of 3 boys. Oh, you must be busy. And he is well acquainted
My wife is
with
the busier one.
Oh, God. I bet. I bet. And he's well acquainted both professionally and personally with managing sleep difficulties among youth. So welcome. Again, we're so happy to have you guys here tonight, giving your time for this presentation. And I will turn it over to you, Dr. Coons.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Selena, for the introduction, and thank you to you all for being here. And I know these are really busy times, stressful times, and it's great to be able to create an opportunity for at least part of the day, part of your time to connect, to talk about a really important topic, a topic that really impacts us all, not just kids and youth, but across the lifespan, and something that is really important for all of us to be working toward. Good sleep and optimal sleep. One thing I will say just off the bat, parenting and being involved in raising kids is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. There isn't a great training program for that. There isn't an operations or user manual. And if you are an adult who's involved with multiple children, you will see that you can, each one is different, very different. Approaches that we sometimes take and use with one of our kids doesn't always work for others. Each child is unique in many ways, which just adds even more complexity to the job, right? Of raising kids and being involved in caring for them. So it's hard. It's never going to be perfect, and that's okay. Each day is new, and we all try to do our best, especially with sleep. As we'll talk about, sleep varies night to night. It's never going to be perfect, and that's okay, right? But what we want to do is try to understand what are the kinds of things that we can be doing, either ourselves to help our kids, in order to be sleeping as well as they can be. Now, off the top, are there any pressing or burning questions or topics that people are interested or very curious in learning about? If you have sort of one sort of top question or issue that you're hoping to hear about, in advance, we did receive some requests for discussions around screen time, stress, staying asleep, or what we call sleep maintenance, as well as how do we get more of it. So those topics will already be covered. If there's anything else, feel free to type that in the chat. I'll just pause maybe for a few seconds to allow people to comment. You're also welcome to turn on your microphone, whatever you're most comfortable with. Okay. Kasia, I can't see the chat. So is there anything that people are posting that you're seeing on your end?
So not at the moment, but we do encourage if there is something that you would like to hear. Actually, I have the first one. I apologize. So we have about melatonin. Is there a limit to how long children should be on it?
Okay.
I actually get that question from parents a lot.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So great. So I'll add to the list, and I'll save that for some discussion at the end. In terms of my approach and the structure to the next few minutes, I'll spend a couple minutes just talking about some basics, some foundational knowledge about sleep, because I think it's really important to have a few foundational pieces in front of mind. Then we will shift and we'll talk about a case example. I think one of the best ways to learn about the issues and how to approach managing them is to talk about them in the context of a real person, a real life situation. And then toward the end, I'll reserve a couple minutes for some questions and answers, either related to the talk or truthfully anything. So we can venture off to other topics related to sleep or other aspects of mental health, because when we look at other aspects of mental health, sleep is a symptom of a majority of problems. Okay, so what's really fascinating is that we don't really understand what sleep is all about, interestingly. Sleep, we've only been studying it for, for about 3 decades. We understand that it's opposite from being awake. And we understand that when sleep isn't happening optimally, a number of negative outcomes result. So for example, mental or cognitive, impacts our ability to focus, to pay attention. We understand that it has negative impacts on our physical performance, right? Concrete things like the time it takes us to react to a situation or a stimulus. It impacts our ability to learn things when sleep is not happening optimally. It impacts our ability to remember, right? Things that we are trying to learn or things that we need to remember throughout our days. It impacts our emotional health and emotional states. We are more reactive to stress and stressful situations. We're more anxious. Where moods are more variable, negative mood states specifically. So a number of emotional consequences, as well as physical health. So over time, chronic states of not getting enough sleep and being sleep deprived is associated with some developmental challenges, physical developmental challenges, as well as increases our risk of developing health problems, right? Chronic health problems. So we understand a number of the bad things, right, that can happen from not getting enough sleep. But truthfully, we still don't understand it. It is still a bit of a mystery. The brain is a very complicated organ, and there's still much to learn about it. So this is a picture of a young boy who's undergoing a sleep study. So this is a very specific kind of test that we can use to really understand the true nature of difficulties or problems that a person is having. Adults can also have sleep studies done. They look the same. The equipment is the same. There's electrodes, attached to this boy's head. He has a mesh netting over his hair to keep electrodes in place. And the purpose of those electrodes is to monitor brain activity. And specifically when we're sleeping, our brain transitions through a number of waves or cycles that we refer to them as. And our brain waves while we sleep and as kids sleep are divided into two categories. The one that people are most familiar with is the REM sleep, which stands for the rapid eye movement. This is the REM sleep is associated with a lot of dream activity. And when we actually look at the brain activity and we contrast REM sleep versus brain activity during the day while we are awake, the waves look virtually identical. So in other words, there's a lot of activity that's happening during REM sleep that looks very, very similar to when we're processing information when we're awake. The main difference is the eye movements. So the way we tell the difference is that we can see these very rhythmic muscle contractions, eye movements that are happening, which helps us to tell, is this person awake or are they in a REM cycle? The opposite stage, the other stage of brain activity is called non-REM, the non-rapid eye movement. And within that is divided into 3 stages: non-REM stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. So the reason I'm explaining the different sleep stages to you is just to have kind of a basic understanding of what the brain's doing and what's happening when kids are sleeping, and truthfully when we're sleeping also. These cycles are cyclical over the course of the night. So when we fall asleep, we hit stage 1. After a few minutes, we hit stage 2, which is a little bit deeper. Then we hit a stage 3 sleep, which is referred to as deep sleep. This is it's the gold. It's the stuff that helps to recharge our battery before we hit a REM cycle. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. Why that's an important detail to understand: when we, and kids in particular, come back up to a stage 1, it is very shallow. So it's a natural time when we actually might wake up. It's normal to wake up throughout the night. And this is usually the time at which we will wake up. We come back to a shallow stage. We might notice that our arm is kind of asleep, or we're uncomfortable. So we have to kind of reposition. Usually then off back to sleep we go. But that's also a very prime sort of time for kids to wake up, noticing their anxiety that they might be experiencing. They might have heard a noise, right? The dog downstairs in the kitchen. That they hear that noise, they get scared, and that sort of prompts them to wake up. So it's usually this transition point back to stage 1 is when some of the disruption can happen. I'm not really going to go into much detail here about the brain, other than to say that sleep is regulated by our brain and by two parts of our brain specifically, called the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And these two centers within the brain produce a number of brain chemicals, one of which I'll just mention. The rest I'm not going to get into, but this is melatonin. Right, so that someone sort of raised the question in the chat about melatonin. So yes, melatonin, we can go to a drugstore to purchase, or a health food store to purchase in a bottle, right? It's promoted as a sleep, what we call a sleep aid. But the brain actually produces melatonin naturally. And the melatonin is our natural sleepy hormone. Within the brain, there are two systems that work together to regulate our sleep as well as our wakefulness. These two systems are referred to as the circadian rhythm, otherwise known as our biological clock. And the second system is referred to as sleep drive. And sleep drive, I'll mention a bit more in a moment, is analogous to to hunger for our appetite, right? So sleep drive is really that hunger for sleep, or that drive for sleep. So this slide shows sort of a visual image of the functions of our circadian rhythm. So this circle represents 24-hour rotation, or 24 hours throughout the day, or one full rotation around the sun. Toward the top of the circle, and around the circumference of the circle, you'll see times within the 24 hours sort of noted. The top part of the circle we can see is 12 noon. And it's also associated with the lightest part, or the lightest shading within the circle. And that's because that's when the sun is at its peak, and it's the brightest point throughout the day. The bottom of the circle, the opposite from noon, is midnight, which is associated with the darkest part of the circle. So when the sun is down and the moon is up. The reason why I'm speaking about the sun in the context of the circadian rhythm is because our circadian rhythm is driven by our exposure to natural sunlight. Every living organism has a circadian rhythm. And this circadian rhythm also follows about a 24-hour cycle, which is equivalent to one full rotation around the sun. You'll note on the bottom right part of the circle, 2100, which represents 9 p.m., something specific happens. And this something that happens is melatonin, right? That hormone that I just mentioned, that is released by parts of our brain, is secreted into our bloodstream. So this is our sleepy hormone. The other part I'm going to mention is toward the morning. So on this figure, it's around 7:30, and that's the melatonin secretion stops. So the starting and stopping of the melatonin release is driven by the position of that circadian rhythm. Okay, the position of that rhythm is again sort of dictated by our exposure to natural light. So why that's important? So when the sun goes down and it gets dark, naturally the brain is going to want to secrete melatonin. But there are times when we can sort of get in the way of our brain working optimally, and that's if we're staying exposed to light too far into the evening. So this time of year, it can be a bit of a problem because we're approaching the longest days of the year. It's going to be bright for the longest. And if we do have some too much exposure to light, it interrupts and disrupts our brain's natural release of melatonin. In particular, youth, adolescents specifically, are quite susceptible to these types of disruptions. And we'll talk about that in the context of screen time. Sleep drive, this other system, is, as I mentioned, analogous to our hunger for our appetite. Right? So if we think about our hunger for a moment, after we eat a meal and our stomach is full, hormones are sort of released that communicate to our brain to alert us to the fact that we're full, we're satiated. At that point, our hunger is going to be at its weakest point. As time passes from that meal, our hunger is going to slowly start to build. It's going to reach a point where our body starts to let us know that it's approaching time to refuel, and we start experiencing hunger signals, and that cues and prompts our body to eat. And so this process sort of continues throughout the day. Sleep drive is very similar. So the bottom of this graph represents time across the day. And assuming a person is sleeping typically throughout the evening, shortly after waking, that sleep drive is going to be at its weakest point. As time passes throughout the day, we can see those arrows, the length of those arrows getting longer, which means that our sleep drive is growing in strength across the day. At a certain point in the evening, when it is dark out and the sun is down, is the strongest, ideally the strongest signaling for our sleep drive. If we can get this strong sleep drive happening in and around that same time that our melatonin is being released naturally from our brain, it sets the perfect conditions for sleep to be happening. Okay. Common problems where people might interfere with this process, napping is a great example. Right? Napping is almost like having a snack right before dinner. Right? If we have a snack before dinner, we're not going to be as hungry for the meal. Same goes with napping with respect to our sleep drive. So as we'll talk about in the case example, napping is generally something we want to avoid. How much sleep do kids and youth need? Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas about that? And you're welcome to type a number in the chat. I'll just pause for a moment to give you a chance.
14 hours. My gosh, Kasia.
I typed for the children.
Yes.
Depends on the age, I would say. Like,
okay.
Right? I don't know. Maybe a toddler or a preschooler would be 14 hours, including the nap during
Absolutely.
the day. And then
any other thoughts from people in the chat?
8 hours. We have 8 hours here, twice, and what else? I guess depends on the age too.
Okay, so all of you are actually correct, right? And to Kasia's point, it really does depend on the age. So so in this figure here, the up and down the y-axis, or the horizontal axis, represents hours of sleep, and across the bottom we have age. The left side, we start at birth from infants, and we progress all the way to adulthood. So infants need the most sleep. They're sleeping a vast majority of the day, on average about 15 hours plus or minus, right? There's some variability around that depending on the individual. As children grow older, we start to need less and less sleep. So up to the first 12 months or first year of birth, that's starting to then reduce down to closer to 13 hours. Then once we hit the preschool years, we're hovering around 11. This is on average. And then get into school age, we're down to 10. Teenagers, about 9 hours, somewhere between 8 and 10. And then by adults, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours is the recommendation. The red line here represents when naps stop, typically, right, for kids, which is sometimes a hard transition for parents and adults. Missing that window of an hour and a half or however long just to, I don't know, sit, do laundry, something else. So relevant to the population we'll be talking about tonight, school age kids need around 9, teenage years somewhere between 8 and 10 hours. A couple of issues with respect to development that impact sleep. So among the school age kids between 6 and 12 years of age, a lot of cognitive, mental development is happening. And as their cognitive abilities are developing, kids start to become more aware of lots of things, but in particular relevant to sleep, sometimes dangers, right? Noises at nighttime, shadows, kind of, behind the curtains. They start sort of thinking about, what could that be? And sometimes they start thinking about bad sorts of things happening. There's a monster sort of under my bed. Somebody's trying to sort of break in. And in this last year, truthfully, coronavirus, right? This is, kids it's sleep and nighttime is fertile time for worries and anxious thoughts to creep in because the rest of the world is starting to quiet down and we don't have the same distractions. As kids get older, they're starting to increase their independence from parents, right? So when babies are babies, we put them to bed, right? We have a whole bedtime routine. There comes a point at which kids start to then put themselves to bed. And as they become more independent from the parents and that process, sometimes that transition isn't always smooth. Kids start to become involved in lots of activities. And sometimes the schedules of these activities really conflicts with sleep. I think the classic examples are the 6 a.m. hockey practices that are pretty common as one example. Peer relationships may start to then interfere with sleep time, especially if kids are chatting with their friends or talking with their friends, meeting on, Google Hangouts or what have you. Anxiety, right, can become a problem for some kids at this age, and particularly again at the nighttime for the reasons I mentioned. And then the electronics, right, they're everywhere. It's hard to sort of manage that and teach kids how to manage that well. Into the teenage years, we are now into puberty, right? We are into hormonal changes, developmental changes that have a big impact on the two systems that we've been talking about that regulate our sleep and wakefulness, the circadian rhythm, as well as the sleep drive. And the problems for kids, or teens specifically, is that the position of their circadian rhythm naturally delays by a couple of hours. So why that's relevant for sleep, that melatonin release that naturally happens at a certain point in the evening starts to then happen a little bit later than it did when they were younger. That is a normal part of development. But where we then start to run into problems is on the back end. Because once if a kid's staying up till 11 or midnight and we're saying they need 10 hours of sleep, sleeping in till 9 or 10 in the morning is likely not going to be an option if they're assuming they're going to be getting to school. So the timing of school specifically and when they need to wake up, maybe there's travel time or a commute associated with that. Maybe there's a bus ride. We don't have as bad of an issue here, but I was working with the school board last year out in the Ottawa way and in a rural community, and kids were having to, catch the bus at 7 in the morning, right, to get to school, have an hour and a half bus ride to get to school. So it was just really interfering with sleep. The other piece around sleep drive is that among adolescents, going back here, this natural building in intensity that happens over the day doesn't happen as quickly for teenagers, right? So this drive starts to build more slowly over the course of the day. So come bedtime, their sleep drive may not be as strong as it needs to be, combined with a natural shifting in their circadian rhythm, which is going to lead to a later bedtime for some teenagers. So some common problems sleep problems that arise for both school-age kids as well as teenagers: insomnia, right? Problems falling asleep, problems staying asleep, waking up earlier than they want to or the parents want, and contributing to a number of problems throughout the daytime. Nighttime fears, right? Still the sounds, the noises. Some kids still are, afraid of the dark and what might be lurking, kind of behind the curtains. We see sometimes night wakings and what we call sleep association. So very, let's say, for example, that transition to a shallow stage of sleep that I was mentioning is associated with waking up. If kids are anxious, it's a natural time for them to wake up and then maybe come to mom or dad into your room to kind of wake you up to ask for help. And sometimes kids develop this association, this perceived need to have mom or dad present, or the conditions need to be just right in order to get back to sleep. Nightmares can become a problem. as cognitive development's happening, the imagination is really starting to evolve, exposure to things on YouTube, programs on Netflix that might be sort of scary sort of in nature can impact the dreams, the dream content, breathing problems, and then we get into sort of less common things like restless limbs or restless legs, and then a sort of a sleeping too much problem that we refer to as narcolepsy. So I think that's enough on the foundational pieces. Let's jump into a case example. And I'm going to tell you about a young guy who's truthfully a pretty typical young person that I would work with in my practice. And so this young guy, his name's Liam, and Liam is 13 years old. He's in grade 8 and obviously doing virtual school right now. And Liam's a healthy boy, right? So he does not have any health problems, chronic health problems, which sort of which is good, because sometimes the chronic health problems just add extra layers of complexity here. But fortunately, in Liam's case, we don't have to, he's not contending with those. Liam's having trouble waking up in the morning for school. Mornings are rushed, pretty chaotic, right, in his house. His parents are really kind of struggling to wake him up, almost, like needing to get a firecracker under him to get going in the morning. And one of the things that Liam's parents has been noticing is that Liam's doing his virtual school in his bedroom. He has a desk, he has a sort of a workspace, but frequently in the afternoon, they find that he's migrated over to the bed and he's actually sleeping when he's supposed to be, in class. Parents have also gotten some feedback that Liam isn't handing in all of his assignments. And of the work that he is handing in, the quality just isn't the same. So he's a bright boy. He's been a very strong kind of academic student, but there's a clear change, right, in his performance. Another interesting piece is parents are also finding evidence of someone being in the kitchen. So when they wake up in the morning, they come down and, Liam's parents, they did the dishes, the night before, but there are dirty dishes, right, in the sink. So a couple of pieces that they're noticing to suggest that there could be some issues. Bedtime during the weekday for Liam is 11, and he wakes up, or his parents are really trying to get him out of bed by 8. Liam is finding it really hard to fall asleep. By his report, it's taking, up to a couple of hours, depending on the night. And another issue is he's waking up, right? So he's both having problems falling asleep as well as staying asleep. And he admits, right, that yes, he goes down to the kitchen because sometimes he's hungry. One of the issues he's describing is that he's not feeling tired, right, at bedtime. He's just not feeling sleepy. So instead of falling asleep, he hangs out on his phone. He might watch YouTube, something on Netflix, until he starts to feel sleepy and able to get off to bed. But sometimes, as I mentioned, it could take a couple of hours. He's tired, right? He's tired a lot during the day. He's napping, right, in school when he's supposed to be doing his coursework. Weekends, he gets a sort of a bit of a reprieve in some ways, but the pattern is also different. So weekend bedtime for Liam is anywhere between 1 and 3, right, in the morning. At least this is what his parents know. And on the weekends, he's waking up somewhere around noon. School has been getting stressful for him. He acknowledges that. He doesn't feel good about the quality of work. He's putting a lot of sort of pressure on himself. He knows his grades are not, they're kind of dropping. It's not the level where they were, and that is upsetting to him. He's also irritable, both with him, his parents as well as his sister, and he's kind of checked out in some ways, right? Liam's normally a chatty guy. Typically, his parents, they will get the kids having conversation in and around dinner time in the evening, but Liam's been doing a lot less of that, a lot less kind of participating. Liam does play rep hockey, but obviously he hasn't been able to do that since the pandemic. They've been trying to do sort of Zoom fitness classes with his team, but he's lucky to get on, a few days a week, and even when he does, it's just not the same. So let me pause here for a moment and maybe just open it up to do a little bit of group brainstorming. What do you think is going on with Liam here? What are some ideas of some of the factors that could be contributing to some of his issues?
People, again, can feel free to use the chat, or you can take yourself off mute if you're comfortable to say out loud.
So we have the first one, sounds like he is sleep deprived and he's not coping well. We have that there is stress present and the school routine is disrupted, absolutely. Hormones, someone put. Sleep cycle is not consistent, absolutely.
Alham, did you want to say something as well? I think I saw a hand.
Yes. Hi everyone.
Hi.
Well, you're describing my son. I have a 15 years old teenager, and it's exactly the same like Liam, right? I think everything, all the routine is disrupted with the lockdown, and then also lack of going out for activity, the sunshine or sunlight. Like my son, he didn't go out for over 1 month from his room or our house, right? And he doesn't have any walks, any activity, any like sunlight coming to his room. And also the socialization. They don't have, even though it's on social media all the time, right? But it's not the same like when they have friends around and all that stuff. All the activities, the normal activities that they have during the day, I think that's contributing to all these problems of sleep.
Oh, absolutely.
So
And Ellen, I mean, Liam is not alone. Your son is not alone. There are
yeah,
so many young people who are having,
yes.
going through similar kinds of issues. Everyone's situation is different, but there are these common threads, right, that we are seeing across people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Adults also, right? Yes, we're talking about, a youth example here, but adults too are also having similar impacts. So some of the symptoms and the problems, just as you're mentioning, absolutely. So he's not getting enough, right? Liam is sleep deprived. How do we know he's sleep deprived? Well, he's napping, right, throughout the day. There comes a point at which our brain takes over, right? Sleep is hardwired, right? Our brain is programmed to produce it. We cannot survive without it. There will come a point where our brain will just take over and off we go. And that's what's happening here with Liam. So napping is not normal. Yes, sometimes, people enjoy, taking a nap on a Sunday afternoon or in the summertime when they're, reading their book at the park. But on a regular basis, napping is not normal. And what we also know is that some people can get away with napping without it having a negative impact on our nighttime sleep. But for people who are prone to some sleep difficulties, it's a whole other ball of wax. Our body will produce a certain amount within that 24-hour period, and naps simply just subtract from the amount that we get during the night. So mental health, people talked about stress. He's stressed, he's anxious, he's maybe sad and kind of withdrawn, he's irritable. School engagement, school performance is an issue. Liam is 13, so he's going, he's transitioning through puberty. So we have hormonal changes. Perhaps we're seeing, some of that circadian rhythm shifting that we were talking about in that delay in his bedtime. This slide helps to pull together our sort of how we think about how sleep problems develop to begin with. And we use this model that's called the 3 Ps, right? P as in Peter. The first P stands for predisposing factors, right? In life, we are all dealt a certain hand of cards, and our cards are our cards, i.e. our genetics. We can't do anything about that. But we also know that the environment does make a difference, right? So maybe Liam and his family haven't always prioritized sleep, right? Maybe there isn't any really thought to sleep. Maybe sleep is something that happens when you get everything else done, right, and accomplished. Another predisposing factor in Liam's particular case is that he's an academic kind of overachiever. And we know that kids who are, strong students, they set a high bar for themselves. They're also, prone to being anxious, and anxiety has an impact on sleep. The second P stands for precipitating factors. These are like the stressors, right? The things that happen in life that kind of activate or kind of trigger an underlying susceptibility. So currently, the pandemic, right, for him. Life is very different for Liam. He's now virtual schooling. He's not seeing his friends. He's not playing hockey. He's not getting the same exercise, getting outside. And he's going through a lot of negative emotions associated with all of those changes. The third P are the perpetuating factors, right? The stuff that keeps it going. These include things like inconsistent sleep schedules, napping during the daytime, screen time in bed, bed used for virtual school, as well as physical inactivity. So the right side of this slide here shows a sort of a figure, right? A graph. There's a line halfway down the graph that is called the insomnia threshold. For in other intents, this is the point at which sleep is a problem. Above the line is a problem. Below the line is not a problem. So what we can see is sort of how these different factors, the predisposing factors, precipitating factors, and perpetuating factors contribute to the development of the sleep problems. So having some predisposing factors, the green section alone is well below the threshold for sleep problems. So just because we might have a susceptibility doesn't mean we're going to have the problem. But when we combine it with some stressful things happening in life, the precipitating factors, boom, right up like the Rocky Mountains here, well above that threshold for sleep problems. Those two pieces combined create the problem, but the perpetuating factors all reflect all of the things that Liam has been doing to either cope or approach his day, right? The inconsistent schedules, the napping, the screen time, all of that stuff helps to maintain that problem over time. That's really, really important information to know, because this is all the stuff that we target in order to resolve the issue. We can't change Liam's genetics. That is what it is. The environment, we do have some influence over the environment, and we can have conversations, with parents or other caregivers about, approaches to sleep, perhaps. We might be able to help Liam better manage, right, that high bar that he sets for himself. But the main focus is really on these perpetuating factors. So what are some things that Liam's parents could do to help him in the shorter term? The first one sounds obvious, and I think it's a really important one to talk about anyway, because I don't know about your kids, but I can tell you with mine, when I ask them questions, sometimes I get, I don't know. How was your day? Did you go to school? You almost get the same response regardless of the question. So how we talk to our kids makes a big difference. Kids hate it when we sit down to have a conversation, most kids. We need to think about what might work better. So maybe going to do an activity, right? Maybe Liam's dad or mom could maybe take him fishing, right? Let's maybe go. Maybe Liam doesn't fish. So what? Let's get a fishing rod and let's go try something new, right? And while they are doing an activity, maybe we can then, probe with a couple of questions. How are you doing? Maybe we can make an observation or two. Liam, I've noticed some dirty dishes, right, in the sink in the morning, when I wake up. Do you know what that's about? Right? Subtle, gentle, kind of probing questions. And while we're doing an activity, maybe Liam is going to open up a little bit. One of the things we want to try to do is validate, right? Validate and make Liam feel heard, understood, that his experiences are understandable, right? Talking about, gosh, this pandemic has been really hard, right? I can imagine how much it sucks to not be able to see your friends at hockey. We can also normalize by doing some sharing of our own, because you know what? Sleep problems are not unique to kids, right? We've all had sleepless nights. We've all gone through stressful periods where our sleep was disrupted. And we have an opportunity to do a little bit of sharing about, Liam, I can remember when I was back in school, I went through this period when I didn't sleep very well, right? And sometimes kids, Liam, might be a little bit curious, right, about that. And it starts a little bit of a conversation. Another piece that I think is important is to learn, right, about sleep, just as we are doing here, having conversations and learning about sleep. Maybe this is something that we could do as a family, right, and try to sort of approach learning about sleep in a creative way, a fun way. Concrete example, maybe, Liam hasn't been doing fantastic in school. Well, maybe, if mom or dad connected with his teacher, maybe his teacher would be open to Liam doing a little project on sleep, right? As a way to maybe make up for some of the shortfalls. Liam cares about school and how he does, so that actually might be a hook for him. He might be motivated to spend a bit of time learning about sleep, and with a bit of more knowledge, he might then be able to see that maybe this isn't a good thing, right? Maybe things could be a little bit better for me. Another fun idea, so I've got here Kahoot. I don't know if anyone's heard of Kahoot, but it's like an online platform for games, trivia. You can actually make your own Kahoots, and kids love beating parents. Kids love beating the adults at games, cards, you name it. And maybe you could sort of make a family Kahoot, and the kids actually get to make the Kahoot with the questions and the answers, and their goal is to try to stump the parents, right? And make it kind of fun and engaging. One of the other ways to learn about sleep is to actually track it over time. Our sleep changes night to night, and that's normal for everyone. But understanding those patterns can be really important. I was working with a student who was in grade 9 recently, and he was open to tracking his sleep, and he was actually able to see for himself that on nights when he doesn't sleep as much, he has a harder time in school. And that was such a huge dot to connect for him. There was a big light bulb that went on. And it was more powerful, the fact that he could see it himself, than coming from a parent or teacher or doctor, right? So sometimes we can help other people learn from their own experiences and doing it together, right? So rather than sort of making Liam feel, I don't know, like he's got homework and he's being punished, maybe this is something fun we could all do, right? Kind of as part of a bit of a project. Maybe we can spend the next week learning about our sleep as a family, right? As our family unit. Other things that, parents could do, prioritizing sleep as a family, right? So this is a family conversation, not just a Liam conversation. Because if Liam feels, centered out, different in some way, it may not go as well, right? But if we can be talking about prioritizing sleep as a family, it might help to increase his openness to making some changes. Setting some family goals, right? So one of the goals, getting rid of screens as a concrete example. We tell our kids, okay, off your phones, off your devices. Well, you know what? Sometimes parents say that, but then they're sitting on their phone in the hallway, or they're sitting on their phone sort of downstairs. I had my my 9-year-old son say to me, well, why, when we go to bed, why do you get to watch TV? I go down to watch the news. And you know what? It's a really good point, right? So maybe some of the changes that we're asking, right, of our kids, we need to be modeling ourselves, right? So maybe there's a place where everyone can put their phones at a certain point in the night and everyone's phone stays there, right? They come out the next day in the morning. Normalizing imperfection. It's never going to be perfect, and that's okay. Our sleep changes and varies night to night. That's the way it goes. Using the bed for sleep only. So having Liam's workstation for school in his bedroom may not be the best strategy. Yes, there may not be another space in the house, but if we have an option, it might be wise to move that out of the bedroom because it might be less tempting for him to crawl in bed when he's so tired. Doing what we can to get Liam some exercise, making sure he's getting out. And sometimes we have to do it in a fun way. Not every child plays hockey or is involved in organized sports, but the kind of, really what we're talking about is getting the heart rate up, right? We can do that through games. We can go walking. Maybe we can go walking on a trail right together as a family and explore something, a new place together. Having evening wind down routines, and again, not just for Liam, not just for the kids, but let's kind of model that and support each other all in that process. The last point, consistent wake time. It's the last one on the slide, probably the most important on this slide, is that consistency in the wake up time. Normal for people, right, to sleep differently on the weekend when we don't have to go to school or go to work. However, our circadian rhythm gets angry. It does not like it. Has anyone had the opportunity to travel and change time zones before? Show of hands, or yeah, a couple hands. Okay.
Sucks.
Yeah. What does that feel like?
Horrible.
Yeah. That's the same effect that it causes this on the circadian rhythm, this shifting of the wake time. It creates an effect like jet lag, right? So it feels awful. Things not to do, try not to ramp up emotions. I know it can be frustrating. Parents, we are not perfect. Sometimes we lose our cool. That's normal, okay? Do our best though to try to kind of, not make it more stressful because in this case, Liam, he's stressed enough already. Try not to engage in the discussions around it at 2 a.m. down in the kitchen when Liam's getting a snack if you know he's there. Wait for a neutral time. Don't punish, right? It's not Liam's fault. There are some biological changes that are happening naturally that are not his fault, that happen to us all in and around the stage of puberty. Don't just tell kids to go to bed. Telling kids just to go to bed is almost like telling someone who's really upset to not be upset. Right? It's really hard to do in that moment. I'm sure, if Liam could go to sleep, he would, but stuff is getting in the way of him actually doing that. Trying not to maintain double standards, right? So as we were talking about with screens, like saying, okay, it's not okay for you to have your phone at bedtime, but it's okay for me to have my phone at bedtime. Kids really respond negatively to those inequities, those perceived inequities. And don't ignore the issues, right? So these are issues that, yes, we're in a pandemic, and no, the pandemic is not going to be forever. However, some of the problems, those perpetuating factors can stick around even once we have the pandemic is over. When to get help, when the sleep problems don't go away, when it's associated with high levels of distress, whether it be anxiety, sadness, irritability, anger, and when those sleep issues are interfering with your child's function, either academically, socially, or family. So going back to Liam's case, Liam's family needs some help, and hopefully they can reach out to get it. Where to get help? Family doctor is a great place to start. If you don't have one, walk-in clinic is the other option. Nurse practitioner, so especially within the family health team model, NPs might be more accessible than the GP might. Pediatricians, if you happen to be connected to a pediatrician, but not everyone is, or psychologist or other mental health professional that does have some expertise in sleep. So lastly, just a couple of take-home messages. It's biological process. Everyone needs it. How much we get and the quality varies over time and changes as we get older. The genes, as well as environmental factors, are involved in the sleep problem starting, but the behavioral and the psychological stuff is what keeps it going in the long term. So we want to try to identify the factors that are getting in the way and try to get some help to sort it all out. And lastly, but not leastly, it's really, really important for parents or if there are multiple caregivers involved to be on the same page as much as possible. It's hard on kids when messages are different or, things are inconsistently managed. I know it happens sometimes and it is a reality and it's associated with other complex dynamics, but when possible, getting some help to resolve that also. Last slide here are just some resources for your reference. These are all, great sources of information. The last one, I don't have time to play the YouTube video now, but Dr. Eric Prather, he's actually a friend and a colleague. We work together down in the US. He's a sleep researcher, and he works at the University of California, San Francisco. He did a neat little series for a magazine called Wired on sleep. And he was tasked with talking about sleep with 5 different age groups of people, all the way from kids right up to adults. And it's a really sort of creative and engaging 5-minute pitch on the school age kids, but another 5 minutes on with the adolescents. But as a way to try to learn about sleep, it's a kind of a fun and engaging video. And we all know our kids like YouTube. Lastly, on this page is just my contact information if anyone does want to reach out or for either support or has any other questions about sleep. So without taking any further time, I'll stop there and open it up to see if anyone has any questions either about any of the content, Liam, or other topics related to sleep.
So Dr. Kunz, thank you so much. That was so informative, and the strategies were amazing, and kind of think that to start thinking that sometimes, especially with that, how we model certain behaviors for our children, right? And we expect, I was raised on why? Because I said so sometimes. So it doesn't work like that. We know nowadays that doesn't work like that. So I do have a question from one of the participants. It pertains to ADHD. So the question was, how does ADHD affect sleep in teenagers?
Yes, so ADHD does affect sleep. Can be a problem, especially when ADHD is being managed by stimulant medications. The stimulant medications do take a sort of a longer period of time to eliminate from the body. And if those meds are taken too late in the day, that can be quite disruptive to sleep. But outside of sort of the stimulant medications, we do know that there's a pretty strong association between the presence of ADHD and symptoms of having troubles, falling asleep, sort of staying asleep. I think it's a really good conversation if you are getting some support for ADHD from a doctor or another healthcare provider. They're potentially, depending on the nature of the sleep problem, definitely behavioral, types of approaches are going to be the go-to regardless of the sleep issue. Yes, there are medications that can be used for sleep and sometimes are used for sleep. But all of the research, science, and evidence shows that it's the behavioral stuff that really should be the frontline approach to treating sleep difficulties. Sometimes kids and adults need a little bit of help from a medication, but also those sleep meds are not intended to be used in the longer term. So it really, again, comes back to some of the behavioral and mental health supports for sleep.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that Lee?
Yes.
Hi, Lee.
Hi. I have 2 left at home. My daughter is in grade 9, and other than staying in her room a lot, she's totally self-sufficient. She gets up and has her own routine and doesn't miss class ever. My son is in grade 12, and he has managed to get himself completely backwards. And I think a lot of it started with his gaming team. They all decide of when they're going to come back on. And I mean, he's not going out much, but he is working out in the basement, but at like 11 or 12 at night. But he is seriously backwards, and I don't even know where to start, because other than throwing ice water or something on him, like, you cannot get him up.
Yes, right, because he's in the middle of stage 3 non-REM sleep, and that's where he's getting the good stuff.
Like a bed shaker alarm. It's like this siren that goes off and like vibrates the bed. Nothing works.
So when you say backwards, I mean, approximately what is his? Do you know what his schedules are like? Do you know when he's falling asleep and when he's actually waking up?
I mean, I get up to go to the bathroom at like 6 or 8 in the morning, and he's still awake from being awake from like supper time on.
Mhm.
And then he'll like do a class and then he'll like sleep all day. Unless he's only got one class right now. So unless it's like it's afternoon one,
Mhm.
then that's trickier. Like there's the 8:30 one and then there's the 12:30 one. So
So
I
Lee,
don't know.
that type of extreme kind of shifting in schedule happens. You know, video games, I think, are one of the contributing factors to that. Connecting with people online, sometimes people are just playing till, you know, time just evaporates, and before you know it, hours have passed. And sometimes that habit just gets a bit entrenched. One of the challenges that, you know, for your son that you've described is that he makes his decisions. Right.
Mhm.
Although he lives at home with you, and in theory, you know, might be able to, you know, kind of ask him to do certain things. If he doesn't want to do certain things, he won't. So he needs to sort of be engaged enough, or at least interested enough to learn about it, in order to figure out what changes he would be willing to do.
Okay.
So I would do what you can to help him to see if it might be actually causing him some problems. Now, at this point, it may not be causing him a lot of problems in life. You know, maybe he is able to get to class and largely do what he needs to do reasonably well, and sleep after, you know, when class is done. And that's kind of working for him right now. But it also may not be working for him, right? So looking for those opportunities for him to highlight, you know, kind of how it might be getting in the way for him. Also strategically trying to point out the stuff that he actually might care about, right? So I don't know if he has any aspirations for post-secondary or what life, you know, the next chapter after high school is going to look like for him. But, you know, if that may be a sort of a carrot, if there is any motivation to do better or achieve a certain something, but trying to find that hook for him. You may need some help right in that process, but so don't hesitate to kind of reach out to, you know, your family doctor if you haven't done so already, just for some help or some guidance. Or you're welcome to reach out to me also.
Okay, thank you. And he's actually already decided, because of the pandemic, and he's doing a lap year, which I think a lot of, you know, I mean, who really wants to start university in this, you know? And when my daughter started, she's going into master's. I mean, her first year was in residence, and who wants to spend like an extra 20,000, you know, during pandemic when there really is no residence, you know? It's like they're not motivated to even start something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, the impacts of this pandemic are going to linger longer than the pandemic itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a
Thank
good
you.
point. I think that's exactly the best way to word it, Dr. Coombs. As parents, like, we see a lot of change in our kids, and I guess trying to keep up with it all and push through it all, we don't realize that, you know, all in all, it's just a lot of stress, a lot of unease. And Lee, you're absolutely bang on around not being able to connect with kids and having that no pressure of, hey, I'll just return a year. A lot of students are, which is perfectly okay. I think our kids need to hear that it's okay to be not okay. You know, just in terms of, like, I just heard what you said and I thought, oh boy, can I relate to that. So thank you for sharing that, Lee.
Okay, thanks, Maria.
Yeah, it's really that validation piece, right? It's you know, everyone has difficult experiences for different reasons, and I think, you know, when there is an opportunity to model that, to talk openly and honestly about that, we don't need to be perfect, right? As parents, it's okay to, you know, to struggle at times, and, you know, we're there to sort of support each other in that process.
So I have another question in the chat. How do we fix our circadian rhythm? I have struggled with sleep, and now my 4.5-year-old boy too have difficulty with sleep. It takes 1 to 2 hours for him to finally fall asleep. He keeps telling me I am not sleepy. It just feels he got a lot of energy and not being able to sleep. Yeah.
Approximately when is bedtime for him?
It doesn't say here. Oh,
Doesn't say.
about 8:30. Sorry, about
So
8:30.
about 8:30.
Yeah.
About 8:30. Yeah. So that's, you know, sleep at that age too. It's the falling asleep can be a challenge. Sometimes it's energy driven. Sometimes there are you know, some anxieties that are developing. Imagination is really kind of growing at that point. Kids are then, you know, thinking about the monsters under the bed, you know, scary things in the closet. Depending on how sleep and bedtime is approached sort of in the family, sometimes kids can also develop some associations where they need certain conditions in order for sleep to happen. Sometimes it's mom or dad in bed, you know, extra cuddles, sitting in the room. Soon as they hear the floor creak, they're, you know, their one eye's opening and they're noticing that you're leaving. So sometimes those types of associations can be part of the issue. The circadian rhythm piece, you know, for all intents, it's likely working, right? It's not broken per se, but there might be some factors that are getting in the way of, you know, your son's body naturally, you know, kind of doing its job. And that's, again, you know, where anxiety can be part of it. The other hard part at that age too, kids can't always put into words what they're going through, right, and what they're feeling. So it's a whole lot of guesswork, you know, on the part of the parents or caregivers to try to sort some of that out.
Someone else wrote that, oh no, it's the same person. For example, I'm not able to sleep until it's 12 a.m. or so. Yeah, so it's related to the circadian rhythm again, I guess.
You as the parent?
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes, right, that also may happen in adults where their circadian rhythm may just sort of be operating at a slightly later than desired time. So one of the pieces I didn't mention in my slides here in discussing Liam's case, but I'll mention here because I think it's a really important point: getting exposure to natural sunlight immediately after waking up. So if you have blackout curtains, if the kids have blackout curtains, open them right up. You know, while they're eating breakfast, try to get them to eat breakfast in the brightest spot, maybe even in front of a window. Ideally, right, especially this time of year, some outside time, you know, very shortly after waking, getting a nice healthy dose of natural sunlight can help that circadian rhythm to function optimally. There are some additional, you know, sorts of things. If in fact there is an actual circadian rhythm delay that's happening, there are some interventions that can help, that use a combination of exposure, light exposure. Sometimes it's artificial light exposure, one of these light boxes that we can sometimes prescribe, in addition to the use of some melatonin that we can buy at a health food store or pharmacy. But I wouldn't suggest going down that path, you know, alone. Definitely work with a doctor who can help guide you. It'll be important first to determine, is it in fact a circadian rhythm issue or something else first? But if in fact it is, there are some things that can be done to help. All is not lost.
Were there any other questions, Pasha, that you wanted to get to in the chat or that anyone asked before?
I haven't had any, but I just want to ask about the power naps, because it's a bit of sometimes mixed messaging. I am not a napper, so it's not personally about me, but I know that sometimes people, like you said, that naps are not good. They don't help our circadian rhythm and the possible sleep challenges or difficulties. But then some people would, and some experts would recommend those like power nap. And I guess as adults, we can control them better. But with children, it's harder. How do you control with a child the 20-minute power nap? But what do you like? What is your opinion, Dr. Kunz, on those power naps?
So if insomnia is part of the picture, either problems, you know, routinely falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up too early, I would not recommend naps of any nature. But if insomnia is not part of the picture, and you know, it's where a person is just trying to manage fatigue, naps might be okay. I'm going to go back very quickly to one of the first slides. This one here, the non-REM stages. So stage 1, we're going to be in for about 5 minutes. Stage 2 sleep is we're going to be in for about 15 to 20 minutes. After that, we're into stage 3. So if you're going to have a nap, 20 minutes tops. Once you're into stage 3 sleep, you're going to need a firecracker underneath of you to get up. And if you do wake up, you're often going to feel worse, more tired, more groggy than you did before you had a nap. And that's because you're trying to wake up from deep sleep. So general rule of thumb, if you are going to have a nap, 20 minutes tops.
Okay.
I've
Thank
got a
you.
question to ask. I know before we wrap up, can I ask a question as well, Dr. Coons?
Absolutely.
So this one's on behalf of some of the families that I'm working with right now, in Caroline Families First, that I've seen in the past and have a couple now. We hear a lot about the problems with sleep. And sometimes I think the harder thing for parents is to break that cycle. I think if their kids are going to bed at 11 or 12 a.m. and then they're going to bed and then they're sleeping in, they're late for school, they're missing school. So it's almost like I would suggest to them, wake them up early and then they'll be tired and they'll eventually go to bed earlier. But that causes more problems at home for the parents, and it's power struggles and it's fighting. And it's almost just easier to go on with what they're currently doing than to break the cycle. Do you recommend trying to break it? Is there better ways to break it, or what would you suggest there?
So there aren't fantastic ways. I mean, for starters, any changes that we're making to sleep, we want to do them over a period of time, right? Sort of gradual changes. Right. So a concrete example, when we're transitioning kids from summertime schedule back to school schedule, sometimes we're having to move the timing of sleep back even a couple of hours, depending on how much it's shifted. Not doing that all at once, maybe, 10 or 15 minute increments each day over a period of time. So slow changes. But the timing also might make a big difference. So during school, depending on the situation, might not be the best sort of time to do that. We might be wanting to wait for March break, summer break, Christmas break, if we do need to be, kind of changing kind of more structural changes, right, to the sleep schedule. And sometimes kids need to be accommodated at school. Just the reality is they just might not be, fully functional by 8:30 in the morning, at not, no fault of their own. It just might be a biological process, working with the schools to accommodate, right, and work with the student, in that shorter period while it's a problem.
That's good. I appreciate that. I think that's good info to pass on to some of these families. And that's the nice thing with our roles, is that we can meet with schools and ask them to make those, accommodations to their days. And, we work closely with their school team. So.
And Selena, one quick thing I'll just highlight that you mentioned, you're bang on. So if we are going to be trying to make a change to the schedule, rather than, say, for example, having, your child go to bed earlier, or even us going to bed earlier, if we're trying to, change our schedule, start with the wake up time. Right. So waking up perhaps 15 minutes earlier than you have been, and then sort of slowly moving that back. To Selena's point, that's going to strengthen your sleep drive that day. You're going to be more tired, more fatigued come the following night, and it's then going to be easier to be going to bed a little bit earlier. So we sort of ramp up that sleep drive to use it for our advantage.
Awesome. Wow, that was great. I know I see Kasia has posted the survey in there, which we totally appreciate everyone's feedback. If you have a second to fill it out before we end our call tonight. For those that have left or that are leaving, we can also send the survey with a resource page. We'll take some of the great info and websites, links, tips and tricks, all of that, and put it in a nice resource document for everyone to have access to. So if there's no other questions or comments, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, again, for putting the time in for yourselves and your families. And thank you, Dr. Coons, for sharing all of your knowledge on this topic. It was an awesome presentation, really super informative. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, listen, it's my pleasure, and thanks so much for the invitation. And thank you to everyone who's on the call here for being here. I know, taking an hour and a half out of the day, that's a big investment, especially at this time. So I do appreciate your participation.
For sure. Kasia and Maria Rosa, was there anything that either of you wanted to share or say before we sign off tonight?
I would like to thank Dr. Coons again, because I know that you are a busy man and you have 3 boys. And now the weather is beautiful. I can hear the birds singing, but you are here with us and provided us with this great information and this really, truly wonderful presentation. And again, thank you for all the participants. We know how busy you are as well with your children and online learning and all of these roles that we never expected that we have to be filling in. So thank you, everyone. That was really amazing.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
I just want to echo what Kasia was saying. And also just as like, I don't know, just a mom from like having 3 older kids, if I could shed some hope.
Thank you.
A little bit of hope. I've noticed a huge difference from, my son who used to game all night and then go to school all day, versus now he's 21, and he certainly sees the importance of sleep. So I think, Dr. Coons touched on like just being able to mirror some of the behaviors that we want from our children. And that's so hard sometimes because it's our downtime. And we finally get some peace and quiet to say, text our friends or do whatever. And it's so hard to, mirror that. It is well worth it because one of the things that I did as a strategy was I sat by my son at 2 o'clock in the morning while he was gaming and said, so tell me what is this hype? What is keeping you up so late? It validated how he was spending his time. And slowly we just developed a really good communication and relationship. So just a thought in terms of strategy, just to add on.
Absolutely.
I know it's exhausting. I'm not saying to do it every day.
It's an investment, right? It is an investment, right, to that connection, that validation, and maybe that helps to, open that door to change a bit of a crack wider.
Yeah, and you've been so helpful, Dr. Coons. Thank you so much.
Oh, listen, my pleasure. And thank you for validating some of my experiences.
Well, you've got 3 boys, so I know you know.
And someone actually wrote, thank you all. Have a great sleep.
Yes.
That's the hope for, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Everyone, feel free to disconnect and sleep well. We'll Zoom again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.